The newspaper advertisement had been straightforward in its honesty, if nothing else. Widow, 24 years old, property owner in Santa Rosa, California, seeks husband. Desperate circumstances require immediate response. No drunkards or gamblers. Josephine Jameson had written those words 3 weeks ago with trembling hands, knowing full well what respectable society would think of a woman who advertised herself like livestock at auction. But respectability meant little when winter approached and the roof needed repairs she could not afford, when the vegetable garden yielded less each season because she lacked the strength to work the harder soil near the creek, when coyotes grew bolder each night and she had no one to protect the chickens that provided her only reliable income. She sat now at her kitchen table in the small cabin her late husband had built, sorting through the responses that had arrived at the general store. Most were exactly what she had feared. Crude propositions from men who saw a desperate woman as easy prey, or carefully worded letters from fortune hunters who wanted her 40 acres more than they wanted a wife. She had burned those in the stove without a second thought. One letter remained. The paper was rough, the handwriting unpracticed but careful, as though the writer had taken great pains to make each word legible. She read it again, her heart beating faster with each line. "Madam, I saw your advertisement and find myself compelled to respond. You say you are desperate. So am I, madam, just for different reasons. I am not desperate for land or money. I have lived 7 years alone in the mountains north of Santa Rosa, trapping and hunting. I am desperate for the sound of another human voice at my table. Desperate to remember what it means to care for someone other than myself. Desperate to have a purpose beyond mere survival. If you will have me, I will repair your roof and work your land. I will protect what is yours and ask nothing except that you teach me again how to be a man who lives among people rather than a creature who exists in the wild. My name is Daniel Xavier. I am 26 years old, sound of body, and I give you my word that I will treat you with the respect you deserve. If these terms are acceptable, I will come to Santa Rosa on the 15th of September." Today was the 15th of September, 1878. Josephine rose from the table and moved to the small mirror hanging near the door. She had not thought much about her appearance in the years since Thomas had died from pneumonia, but now she studied herself critically. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a simple bun, showing threads of premature gray at her temples, though she was only 24. Her face was too thin, cheekbones prominent from skipped meals when money grew tight. Her brown eyes looked tired, shadowed by sleepless nights spent worrying. Her dress was clean but faded, patched in several places. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman worn down by hardship and struggle. What would a mountain man expect? Did it matter? This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She needed help to survive, and Daniel Xavier apparently needed human companionship. It would be practical, sensible. She would not let herself hope for anything beyond that. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The sound of horse hooves on the dirt road made her breath catch. She peered out the window and saw a man riding toward her cabin on a large bay horse, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. Even from a distance she could see that he was powerfully built, sitting straight in the saddle despite what must have been a long journey. Her hands moved unconsciously to smooth her dress, to check that her hair was in place. Josephine stepped out onto the narrow porch as the rider approached. He dismounted with easy grace, and she found herself staring. Daniel Xavier was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the afternoon sun. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even through his worn buckskin shirt. He wore canvas pants tucked into sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. A full beard covered the lower half of his face, but she could see strong features beneath it. A straight nose, high cheekbones, intense blue eyes that studied her with the same careful attention she was giving him. "Mrs. Jameson?" His voice was deep, roughened by years of disuse, but not unpleasant. "Yes." Her own voice came out smaller than she had intended. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Xavier?" He nodded, removing his hat. "I hope I am not too late." "I know the letter said the 15th, but I had to come down from the high country and the trail was harder than I remembered." "You are right on time." Josephine gestured toward the house. "Would you like to come inside? I have coffee." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she could not quite name. "Coffee? I have not had real coffee in months." "That would be welcome, madam. Thank you." He followed her inside, and she became acutely aware of how small the cabin must seem to him, how shabby. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a pot-bellied stove, a rough wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs, a few shelves holding her modest collection of dishes and supplies. A curtain separated the space from the single bedroom beyond. The floor was clean, but the boards were worn smooth by years of use, and several were starting to split. Through the ceiling she could see daylight in 3 places where the roof had developed leaks. Daniel said nothing, but she saw him notice everything with those sharp blue eyes. He set his hat on the table and waited while she poured coffee into 2 tin cups. Her hands shook slightly as she handed him one, and she hoped he did not notice. "Please, sit." She took one of the chairs, and he lowered himself carefully into the other. The chair creaked under his weight, and she worried briefly that it might collapse, but it held. He wrapped both large hands around the cup and inhaled the steam with obvious pleasure before taking a sip. "This is good," he said. "Thank you." They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Josephine had imagined this conversation a dozen different ways, but now that he was actually here, all her prepared words fled. She settled for directness. "Did you mean what you wrote in your letter?" "Every word." "You understand that this would be a real marriage? Not just a business arrangement where you work the land and then leave when it suits you." His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "I understand. I am not looking for temporary work, Mrs. Jameson. I am looking for a life. You should know that I cannot pay you wages. There is barely enough to cover basic supplies. You would be working for shelter and food and little else. I have lived on far less, and you should know that She hesitated, unsure how to phrase it delicately. "My late husband and I were married for 3 years. The marriage was not, he was not. There were no children." Daniel set down his coffee cup and leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "Are you trying to tell me that you might not be able to have children?" She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to hold his gaze. "I do not know. It is a possibility. Mrs. Jameson, I spent 7 years living alone in a cave because I could not stand to be around people after the war. I have forgotten how to make conversation that does not involve animal tracks or weather patterns. I probably smell like a bear, even though I bathed in the creek yesterday. If you are worried that I am going to judge you for something that may or may not be true, you can stop worrying. I am the last person who has any right to judge anyone." His bluntness surprised a short laugh out of her, and she saw him smile slightly in response. It transformed his face, making him seem younger and far less intimidating. "Were you really in a cave?" "For the first 2 winters. Then I built a proper cabin, small but solid." "Why did you leave? If you had a cabin and your traps and everything you needed, why come down now?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he spoke, his voice was low. "A man can survive alone, Mrs. Jameson. But there is a difference between surviving and living. I woke up one morning last month and realized I had not spoken out loud in 6 days. Not even to myself. I had become more animal than human. I did not like what I was becoming." He looked up at her. "When I saw your advertisement, it felt like a rope thrown to a drowning man. So I am desperate, madam. Desperate to remember what it means to be a person instead of a ghost walking through the woods." Josephine felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of pain matching her own. She had been drowning too, in her own way. Drowning in loneliness and exhaustion and the fear that she would fail, that she would lose everything Thomas had worked so hard to build. "I think," she said carefully, "that we might be able to help each other. Is that a yes?" She nodded. "Yes, but I think we should be clear about expectations. This cabin has 1 bedroom. I will sleep there. You can sleep out here by the stove until we—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Until we know each other better," Daniel finished for her. "That seems wise. I have a bedroll. I will be comfortable. There is a lot of work to be done before winter. The roof needs repairs. The fence around the chicken coop has gaps that let predators in. The vegetable garden needs to be expanded and protected. And I need help clearing the rocky section near the creek so I can plant more in the spring. I can do all of that." He paused. "How long ago did your husband pass?" "A year this November. Pneumonia took him in 3 days. We did not even have time to fetch the doctor from town. I am sorry." "Thank you." She took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to study him again. "What did you do before you went to the mountains? You mentioned the war." His jaw tightened. "I was a soldier, fought with the Union cavalry. After Appomattox, I came back to California and tried to return to my family's ranch near Sacramento. But my parents had died while I was gone, and my brother had sold the place and moved east. I did not fit anywhere anymore. Everything I knew was gone. So I went into the mountains where nobody would ask me questions or expect me to be something I was not." Josephine heard the weight of old grief in his words and recognized it because she carried her own. "I understand," she said softly. "After Thomas died, people kept telling me I should sell this place and move back east to live with my sister. They did not understand that this is my home now. I cannot just leave it. You should not have to." They finished their coffee in more comfortable silence. Outside, the sun was beginning to sink toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Josephine rose and moved to the stove. "I should start supper. It is nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread. That sounds like a feast to me." While she worked, Daniel went out to tend to his horse and mule. She watched through the window as he unsaddled the bay with efficient movements, rubbed the animal down, and led both creatures to the small paddock behind the cabin where her milk cow and 2 older horses grazed. He moved with the easy confidence of a man completely comfortable with animals, speaking to them in a low voice she could not quite hear. When he returned, he carried his saddle and saddlebags, setting them carefully in the corner. "I brought supplies," he said. "Salt, sugar, coffee, flour, some smoked venison. I figured you might be running low." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes unexpectedly. She had been rationing coffee for weeks, trying to make it last. "Thank you, that is very kind. Partners should share what they have." Partners. The word settled something in her chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. They ate supper at the small table, and Josephine found herself watching Daniel more than she ate. He had large, scarred hands that handled the tin plate and spoon with surprising delicacy. He ate with obvious hunger but not greedily, taking time between bites. When she offered him seconds, he accepted gratefully. "This is the best meal I have had in years," he said. "It is only beans and cornbread. It is a hot meal at a table with another person. That makes it the best meal I have had in years." After supper, Daniel insisted on washing the dishes while Josephine put things away. It felt strange to have someone else moving around her kitchen, but not unpleasant. Just different. As darkness fell, she lit the 2 oil lamps that provided light in the evenings, conscious of conserving the expensive fuel. Daniel unrolled his bedding near the stove and sat on it, looking somewhat uncertain for the first time since he had arrived. "I usually turn in early," Josephine said. "Sunrise comes quickly." "Of course. I will just sit here a while if that is all right." She nodded and retreated behind the curtain to her bedroom. The space was barely large enough for the narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. She changed into her nightgown and climbed under the quilt, but sleep did not come easily. She was intensely aware of Daniel's presence just beyond the thin curtain, of the soft sounds of him settling into his bedroll. Part of her wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, inviting a stranger into her home. But another part, the part that had been slowly dying from loneliness, felt something like hope stirring. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying salt pork. Confused, she dressed quickly and emerged to find Daniel at the stove, cooking breakfast. Morning light streamed through the windows, and she realized with a start that the sun was well up. "I am sorry," she said quickly. "I overslept. I do not know what happened." Daniel turned from the stove, spatula in hand. "You were tired. When's the last time you slept past dawn?" She could not remember. "I should be the one cooking." "Why? I know how to cook. Not fancy, but I can manage breakfast." He gestured to the table. "Sit. Coffee is ready." It felt wrong to let someone else serve her, but she was too surprised to argue. She sat and accepted the cup of coffee he handed her, strong and hot. A few minutes later, he set a plate in front of her with salt pork, fried cornmeal mush, and eggs. "Where did the eggs come from?" "Your chickens. I collected them this morning. Also fed and watered all the animals." "I hope that is all right." Josephine stared at the plate, then at Daniel, then back at the plate. She had been doing all the morning chores alone for a year, dragging herself out of bed before dawn to tend to everything before the day's work began. The thought that someone had done it for her, that she had been allowed to sleep, was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed. They ate together, and then Daniel asked to see everything that needed repair. Josephine took him around the property, pointing out the problems she had been unable to fix herself. He listened carefully, occasionally climbing up to examine something more closely or testing the strength of a fence post. He said little, but she could see him making mental calculation. Finally, he nodded. "The roof first. If we get an early rain and it leaks worse, everything inside will be damaged. Then the chicken coop fence, the garden expansion, and the clearing work. I will need to go into Santa Rosa for supplies. Do you have an account at the general store?" "Yes, but I am nearly at the limit. I have money from selling my winter furs, enough for what we need, Daniel. I cannot ask you to spend your money on my property." He looked at her steadily. "Our property if we are married. That was the agreement, was it not? That this would be a real marriage?" "Yes, but we are not married yet." "Then let us fix that. Is there a preacher in Santa Rosa?" The directness of it took her breath away. "Yes, Reverend Martin." "Then we should go into town, get married, buy supplies, and come back to start work, unless you want a different arrangement." Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. This was happening so fast. She had imagined they would spend time getting to know each other first, that the marriage would come later after they had established some kind of understanding. But Daniel was right. If they were going to do this, they should do it properly, and she had already decided to trust him when she answered his letter. "All right," she said. "We can go today. Are you certain?" She met his eyes and saw genuine concern there, a willingness to wait if she needed more time. That consideration decided her. "Yes, I am certain." They harnessed her wagon and made the 10-mile journey into Santa Rosa. The town had grown considerably since Josephine and Thomas first arrived 5 years ago. The main street boasted a dozen businesses now, including 2 general stores, a bank, a hotel, and 3 saloons. The railroad had reached Santa Rosa 2 years prior, bringing more settlers and commerce. On the outskirts, new houses appeared every month. Though the surrounding area remained primarily agricultural, Josephine was conscious of the stares they drew as Daniel drove the wagon down Main Street. A few people called greetings to her, their eyes curious as they studied her companion. She kept her head high, refusing to show embarrassment. Let them stare. She was doing what she needed to do to survive. They found Reverend Martin at the white clapboard church at the end of the street. He was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and thinning gray hair. He had presided at Thomas's funeral and had checked on Josephine several times in the months that followed. "Mrs. Jameson," he said with genuine warmth, "it is good to see you, and who is this?" "Reverend Martin, this is Daniel Xavier. He has asked me to marry him and I have accepted. We were hoping you might perform the ceremony today." The Reverend's eyebrows rose, but he recovered quickly. "I see. This is rather sudden, is it not?" "I placed an advertisement," Josephine said, lifting her chin. Mr. Xavier responded. "We have corresponded and found our arrangement mutually agreeable." Reverend Martin looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Xavier, might I have a word with you privately?" Daniel nodded and followed the preacher into the church. Josephine waited on the steps, her stomach churning with anxiety. She had no idea what Reverend Martin was saying to Daniel, but she hoped he would not try to talk them out of this. She could not afford to have this opportunity slip away. After 10 minutes, the 2 men emerged. Daniel's expression was unreadable, but Reverend Martin looked satisfied. "Very well," the preacher said. "I will perform the ceremony, but I will need witnesses. Mrs. Jameson, do you have friends in town who might attend?" Josephine hesitated. She had acquaintances but few real friends. Most of the women in town had pulled back after Thomas died, uncomfortable with her reduced circumstances. "I suppose I could ask at the general store." "Already taken care of," Reverend Martin said. "I will fetch my wife and Mrs. Patterson from next door. Give me a few minutes." While he was gone, Josephine turned to Daniel. "What did he say to you?" "He wanted to make sure I understood the seriousness of marriage vows and that I was not taking advantage of your situation. I assured him my intentions were honorable." "And he believed you?" "I think he wanted to believe me for your sake." Reverend Martin returned with his wife, a plump woman with a friendly face, and Mrs. Patterson, one of the town's most respected matrons. If Mrs. Patterson witnessed the wedding, word would spread that this was a legitimate union, which would help quell any gossip. The ceremony was brief and simple. They stood before the small altar in the quiet church, speaking the traditional vows in voices that echoed off the wooden walls. When Daniel slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, Josephine was startled. She had not expected a ring. "It was my mother's," he said quietly, seeing her surprise. "I have carried it with me. I am glad to see it worn again." The gesture touched her more than she wanted to admit. This was not supposed to be a romantic marriage, just a practical arrangement. But the weight of his mother's ring on her finger felt like a promise of something more. "You may kiss your bride." Reverend Martin said. Daniel looked at Josephine, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down to press a gentle kiss to her lips. It was chaste and brief, but it sent warmth spreading through her chest nonetheless. They signed the marriage certificate, and the witnesses added their names. Just like that, Josephine was a married woman again. Mrs. Daniel Xavier. It felt both strange and oddly right. At the general store, Daniel purchased lumber, nails, tar paper for the roof, wire for fencing, and various other supplies. The total was substantial, but he paid in cash without hesitation, adding extra coffee and sugar and a tin of peaches that made Josephine's eyes widen. Peaches were an expensive luxury. "For our wedding supper," he said simply. On the way out of town, they passed the hotel, and Daniel suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop. "Wait here a moment." He disappeared inside and returned carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. He set it on the seat between them without explanation and drove on. Josephine's curiosity burned, but she did not ask. She would learn soon enough. Back at the cabin, they unloaded the supplies, stacking the lumber beside the house. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. Tomorrow the real work would begin, but tonight they were allowed to rest. Josephine made supper while Daniel tended the animals. She opened the tin of peaches and arranged them carefully on 2 plates with cold cornbread and slices of cheese. It was not a fancy wedding supper by any means, but it felt special nonetheless. After they ate, Daniel retrieved the package from the hotel. "I got this for you. I hope you do not mind." Josephine unwrapped it carefully and found a new dress inside, deep blue calico with small white flowers. It was simple but well made, far nicer than anything she had owned in the past year. She looked up at Daniel, speechless. "I saw it in the hotel shop window," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I thought you might like something new. If it does not fit or you do not like it, I can take it back. It is beautiful." Her voice came out thick with emotion. Thank you. You are my wife now. I wanted to give you something. Josephine held the dress against her chest, blinking back tears. No one had given her a gift in so long. She had forgotten what it felt like to be thought of, to be cared for in this small way. That night, she changed into the new dress just to feel the soft fabric against her skin. When she emerged from behind the curtain, Daniel looked up from where he sat mending a leather strap and went very still. "It looks nice," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you again, I love it." They sat together in the lamplight, not speaking much but comfortable in the quiet. Josephine worked on mending a shirt while Daniel finished with the leather and then pulled out a piece of wood and a knife, carving with slow, careful strokes. She watched his large hands shape the wood, fascinated by the contrast between his obvious strength and the delicacy of his work. "What are you making?" "Spoon. Yours are getting worn. Thought you could use a new one." Another gift, another small kindness. Josephine felt the walls around her heart, built so carefully after Thomas's death, beginning to crack. When she finally retired to bed, she lay awake listening to Daniel move around the main room, settling into his bedroll. She thought about the fact that he was her husband now, that by law and custom he had every right to share her bed. But he had not even suggested it. He was giving her time, respecting her boundaries. The realization made her feel safer than she had in months. The next morning, Daniel woke with the dawn and immediately began work on the roof. Josephine brought him coffee and watched as he climbed the wooden ladder he had positioned against the side of the house. He moved with confident ease, examining each section carefully before beginning repairs. "What can I do to help?" she called up. "Hand me supplies when I ask. Otherwise, stay clear. I do not want anything falling on you." She spent the morning doing her usual chores and then working in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds and checking the plants. Occasionally she glanced up at Daniel, watching him work. His shirt was off in the warmth of the September sun, and she could see the play of muscle across his back and shoulders as he hammered new shingles into place. He was built like an ox, all solid strength, but he moved with surprising grace. By noon, he had repaired 2 of the worst sections. He climbed down for lunch, his face streaked with sweat and tar. Josephine had made sandwiches with the ham Daniel had bought in town, and they ate sitting on the porch steps. "You work fast," she said. "I want to get it done before the weather turns. We have maybe a month before the first rains come, maybe less. In that case, I should tell you about the leak in the barn roof, too." He looked at her, and she saw the corner of his mouth quirk up. "Anything else I should know about? The front step is coming loose, and one of the shutters does not close properly. Make me a list. I will work through everything." After lunch, he returned to the roof while Josephine began preparing supper. She made a stew with vegetables from the garden and some of the venison Daniel had brought, letting it simmer slowly on the stove. The cabin filled with the rich smell of cooking meat and herbs. When Daniel finally climbed down from the roof as the sun was setting, he looked exhausted but satisfied. "The worst is fixed. I will finish the rest tomorrow." They ate supper together, and Josephine asked him about his life in the mountains. Slowly he began to talk, describing his cabin hidden in a grove of pines, the creek that ran behind it, the wildlife he saw every day. He talked about tracking elk through the snow, about watching eagles hunt, about nights so cold the trees cracked like gunshots. As he spoke, she heard both his love for the wilderness and his loneliness in it. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I miss the simplicity. But no, I do not miss the isolation. Not anymore." "What changed?" "I did." He met her eyes across the table. "Or maybe I just finally admitted that I was broken and needed to heal." "You cannot heal alone." His honesty moved her. "I think you are wise to recognize that." "Not wise, just tired of being alone." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Daniel worked on repairs from dawn until dusk, pausing only for meals. Josephine managed the household chores in the garden, and in the afternoons she often helped him with whatever he was working on, holding boards steady or passing him tools. They talked while they worked, sharing small pieces of their lives. She learned that he had grown up on a ranch, that his mother had taught him to read, that he had a deep love of horses. He learned that she had been a schoolteacher before marrying Thomas, that she had come west seeking adventure, that she loved thunderstorms and hated spiders. Slowly, carefully, they were building a friendship. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after their wedding, Josephine was washing dishes when Daniel came up beside her with a drying cloth. They worked in comfortable silence until she suddenly became aware of how close he was standing, the heat radiating from his body, the scent of wood smoke and pine that clung to him. Her breath caught, and she nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Daniel caught it smoothly, his large hand covering hers. "Careful." She looked up at him, and the air between them seemed to thicken. His blue eyes were intense, searching her face. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. "Josephine," he said softly. It was the first time he had used her given name. "Yes, I want you to know that I am not expecting anything from you. This marriage can be whatever you want it to be." But I also want you to know that he trailed off, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. That you what? That I find you remarkable. You are strong and capable and kind. You have faced hardship without becoming bitter. I am grateful every day that you answered my letter, that you gave me a chance. Warmth flooded through her, and she realized with a start that she was falling for this quiet, gentle mountain man who had walked into her life just 2 weeks ago. The realization frightened her. She had not expected to feel anything beyond gratitude and maybe friendship. Love was dangerous. Love made you vulnerable. She had loved Thomas, and his death had nearly destroyed her, but as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she knew it was already too late. Her heart had made its choice. I am grateful too, she whispered. He smiled, and she saw relief and something warmer in his expression. Slowly, carefully, he leaned down and kissed her. This time it was not the brief, chaste kiss of their wedding ceremony. This was deeper, more real, full of restrained longing. Josephine felt herself responding, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. I should finish the dishes, Josephine said shakily. Right, yes, dishes. But they stood there a moment longer, neither wanting to move away. Finally, Daniel stepped back, running a hand through his hair, looking endearingly flustered. Josephine turned back to the sink, her hands trembling as she picked up another plate. That night she lay in bed thinking about that kiss, about the way her body had responded to his touch. They were married. There was no reason to maintain separate sleeping arrangements. But she was afraid, not of Daniel but of her own feelings, of the vulnerability that came with truly letting someone in. The next morning, Daniel announced that he needed to go back into the mountains for a few days to retrieve the rest of his belongings from his cabin. I do not like leaving you alone, he said, frowning, but I have tools and furs stored there, and I need to close up the cabin properly. I will be fine, Josephine assured him. I managed alone for a year. I can manage for a few days. Still, I do not like it. Promise me you will keep the rifle loaded and the doors locked at night. His concern warmed her. I promise. He left the next morning before dawn, riding his bay horse and leading the pack mule. Josephine stood on the porch watching until he disappeared down the road, feeling strangely bereft. It was only a few days, but she already missed his presence. She kept busy with work, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables, preserving what she could for winter. The evenings were the hardest, when the cabin felt too empty and too quiet. She found herself listening for his footsteps, forgetting for a moment that he was not there. On the third night, she was awakened by the sound of the chickens squawking in alarm. She grabbed the rifle and ran outside in her nightgown to find a coyote trying to dig under the fence Daniel had reinforced. She fired a warning shot into the air, and the coyote fled. But as she stood there in the moonlight, her heart pounding, she realized how much safer she had felt knowing Daniel was nearby. He returned late the following afternoon, the mule heavily laden with supplies and furs. Josephine heard the horses and ran outside, relief flooding through her at the sight of him. He dismounted and she found herself running to him, throwing her arms around him before she could think better of it. Daniel caught her, his arms coming around her, holding her tight. I missed you too, he said softly into her hair. They stood like that for a long moment before Josephine pulled back, suddenly self-conscious. Sorry, I was just glad you are back safely. Do not apologize. His hands lingered on her arms. It is good to be missed. That evening she cooked a special supper to celebrate his return, using some of the precious supplies he had brought back. While they ate, she told him about the coyote, and his face grew serious. I do not like that it came so close. I will reinforce the fence more and set some traps around the perimeter. I scared it off this time. But coyotes are persistent, and they get bolder when they are hungry. He reached across the table and took her hand. I do not want anything to happen to you. The simple statement, the warmth in his eyes, made her breath catch. Nothing will happen. Not with you here. That is a lot of faith to put in me. You have earned it. After supper, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge. The September night was cool, and Josephine shivered. Without a word, Daniel draped a blanket around her shoulders, then sat close enough that she could feel his warmth. She leaned into him slightly, and he put his arm around her. It felt natural, right? Josephine, he said after a while, can I ask you something? Of course. What was your husband like, Thomas, I mean? She was surprised by the question but not offended. He was a good man, hardworking, honest. He had dreams of building this place into a real farm, maybe even a ranch. But he was not strong, not in body. He tried hard, but the work was difficult for him. I think it wore him down over time, made him vulnerable when the sickness came. She paused, considering. We cared for each other, but it was not a passionate love. It was more like a partnership, a friendship. I think we both wanted something more but did not know how to find it. Do you still love him? I will always care about his memory, but no, I am not still in love with him. He has been gone too long and I have had to keep moving forward. She tilted her head to look up at Daniel. Why do you ask? I wanted to know if you were still grieving, if your heart was still occupied. Her pulse quickened. And why does that matter? Because mine is not occupied anymore. It stopped being empty the day I met you. Josephine turned to face him more fully, her heart hammering. Daniel, I know this started as an arrangement, a practical solution to practical problems. But somewhere along the way it became more for me. You became more. I wake up thinking about you. I find excuses to be near you. When I was in the mountains, all I could think about was getting back to you. He cupped her face gently in his large hand. I am falling in love with you, Josephine. I probably already have. Tears pricked at her eyes. I am falling in love with you too. I tried not to. I told myself this was just practical, that I should not let myself feel too much, but I cannot help it. You are kind and gentle and strong, and you make me feel safe and cared for in a way I have never experienced before. Then why do I still sleep on the floor when we both want more? She laughed shakily. Because I am afraid. Because losing Thomas hurt so much, and loving you means risking that kind of pain again. Because I do not know if I will disappoint you. Because everything is still so new. I am afraid too, Daniel admitted. I am afraid that I have forgotten how to be a proper husband, that I am too rough and wild from my years alone. I am afraid that you will wake up one day and realize you made a mistake. He stroked her cheek with his thumb. But I think we should be afraid together, not apart. Let me hold you, Josephine. Let me show you that you do not have to face anything alone anymore. She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Daniel stood and held out his hand. She took it and let him pull her to her feet. Together they went inside, and for the first time she led him past the curtain into her small bedroom. They came together slowly, gently, learning each other with reverent touches. Daniel was patient and careful, as though she were something precious that might break. When he finally made her his wife in truth, it was with a tenderness that made her weep. He held her close afterward, murmuring reassurances, stroking her hair. I have you, he whispered. You are safe, you are loved. Josephine clung to him, feeling something deep inside her finally let go, some last wall, crumbling. She was vulnerable now, completely open to the possibility of pain. But she was also more alive than she had been in years. They fell asleep tangled together, and when Josephine woke in the night, she found Daniel's arms still around her, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She had not felt this secure, this cherished, ever in her life. The practical arrangement had transformed into something real and precious. The days that followed were filled with hard work and quiet joy. Daniel finished all the repairs and began working on improvements, building a proper smokehouse, expanding the barn, adding shutters to the windows. Josephine helped when she could and managed the household, but more importantly, they learned to be partners in every sense. They talked and laughed, worked and rested, fought occasionally, and made up quickly. One afternoon in early October, Josephine was hanging laundry when she heard raised voices from the direction of the road. She looked up to see 3 men on horseback approaching the cabin. Daniel was in the barn and she ran to fetch him. We have visitors, she said.
I do not recognize them.
Daniel's expression grew serious. He strapped on his gun belt, something he had not worn around the cabin, and stepped outside with Josephine close behind. The 3 men rode into the yard, and Josephine did not like the look of them. They were rough types, their clothes dirty and their faces hard. Can I help you, gentlemen? Daniel asked, his voice even. The leader, a man with a scar across his cheek, grinned unpleasantly. Heard there was a woman living out here alone. Thought we would stop by and introduce ourselves. You heard wrong, Daniel said. She is not alone. The scarred man looked Daniel up and down, his grin fading slightly as he took in Daniel's size and obvious strength. That's so? You her husband? I am, and you are on our property. State your business or move along. Just being neighborly. We do not need neighbors like you. Leave. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. That is not very friendly. I do not care about being friendly. I care about protecting my wife and my home. You have 5 seconds to turn those horses around before I make you leave. One of the other men reached for his gun, but Daniel moved faster than Josephine would have thought possible for a man his size. His own weapon was drawn and aimed before the other man cleared his holster. I fought in the war, Daniel said, his voice cold. I have killed men. I do not want to do it again, but I will if you threaten my family. Now ride out and do not come back. The 3 men exchanged glances. The scarred man looked like he wanted to argue, but Daniel's stance and the steady aim of his gun apparently convinced him otherwise. We will go, but you might want to remember that folks out here can use friends, mountain man. Accidents happen to people who are too unfriendly. Get out. Daniel growled. The men turned their horses and rode off, but not before the scarred man called back. We will be seeing you. Daniel did not lower his gun until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Josephine, and she saw that his hands were shaking slightly. Are you all right? I am fine. You are shaking. Adrenaline. Give me a minute. He holstered his gun and sat down heavily on the porch steps. Josephine sat beside him, taking his hand. You were very brave. I was terrified. If they had decided to push it, if there had been shooting with you here, he did not finish the sentence. But there was not. You handled it perfectly. Those men will be trouble. I know the type. They are probably part of a gang working this area, looking for easy targets. What do? We go into town tomorrow and talk to the sheriff. Make sure there is a report, and we stay alert. I will set up some early warning systems around the property. True to his word, Daniel spent the next few days setting up a series of bells and tripwires around the perimeter of their land. He also began teaching Josephine to shoot more accurately, spending an hour each afternoon at target practice. You are a natural, he said after she hit the target 3 times in a row. Your hands are steady. I was a school teacher. I had to stay calm when children were acting up. It teaches steadiness. He laughed, and the sound made her smile. She loved his laugh. He used it more now, as though he were remembering how 2 weeks passed without incident. Daniel and Josephine began to relax, thinking perhaps the 3 men had been drifters passing through. Then one night the bells rang. Daniel was up instantly, rifle in hand. Stay inside. Bar the door after me. I am not letting you go out there alone. Josephine, no, we are partners. I am coming with you. He looked like he wanted to argue but did not have time. Fine. But stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Do you understand? Yes, they crept outside into the darkness. The moon was only a sliver, providing little light. Daniel moved with silent confidence, and Josephine followed as quietly as she could. They reached the area where the bells had sounded and found the tripwire had been deliberately triggered. Fresh hoofprints marked the dirt. They are testing us, Daniel said quietly. Seeing how we respond. What do they want? Probably to scare you into leaving so they can claim the land, or worse. His jaw tightened. This is not over. They returned to the cabin, and Daniel barred the door and checked all the windows. Josephine tried to sleep, but every sound made her jerk awake. Daniel seemed to sense her distress. He pulled her close against him, wrapping his arms around her. I will not let anything happen to you, he murmured. I swear it. She believed him. But she also knew that 3 men with guns could be more than 1 man could handle. No matter how strong or skilled, the harassment continued over the next week. More bells triggered at night. Supplies left outside went missing. One morning they woke to find the fence around the chicken coop destroyed and 2 chickens killed, though the others had been left alive. It was clearly meant as a message. Daniel went back into town and spoke to the sheriff, but the lawman was old and ineffective, more interested in avoiding trouble than confronting it. He promised to look into it but did nothing. We are on our own, Daniel said when he returned. The sheriff as good as admitted he would not challenge the gang. What gang? They call themselves the Carson Boys. They have been operating in this area for about 6 months, running protection rackets. Pay them and they leave you alone. Do not pay and bad things happen. The sheriff is either scared of them or on their payroll. Josephine felt sick. What do? We do not pay. And we make it clear that we are not easy targets. There are only 2 of us. How can we make that clear? Daniel's eyes were hard. By making sure that if they come for us, they pay a price high enough that it is not worth it. That night, Daniel positioned himself on the roof with his rifle while Josephine kept watch from inside the cabin. Around midnight, they saw torches approaching through the darkness. 4 men on horseback, including the scarred man from before. Leave now, Daniel called down from his vantage point. This is your only warning. We just want to talk, the scarred man called back. About how you can make your problems go away. I am not interested. Turn around. You are making a mistake, mountain man. We could burn this place down around you. You could try. But I have a rifle aimed at your head right now and I do not miss. So, before you do anything stupid, ask yourself if whatever you hope to gain is worth dying for. The scarred man shifted in his saddle, clearly uneasy. You would not shoot. That would bring the law down on you. The law does not care what happens out here, you know that, and I am not bluffing. I have killed more men than I can count during the war. A few more will not trouble my conscience if it means protecting my wife. Daniel's voice was cold and hard. Last chance. Ride away and do not come back. Or test me and see what happens. The tension stretched out. Josephine held her breath, her hand tight on her own rifle. Then, finally, the scarred man cursed and turned his horse. This is not over. Yes, it is. Because if I see any of you near my property again, I will hunt you down. And trust me, I know how to hunt. I spent 7 years in these mountains. I can track you anywhere you go. There is nowhere you can hide that I will not find you. The 4 men rode off into the darkness. Daniel stayed on the roof for another hour, watching, before finally climbing down. Inside, Josephine was shaking. He gathered her into his arms. It is all right. They will not be back. How can you be sure? Because I made it clear that the cost was too high. Men like that are bullies. They want easy targets. We proved we are not easy. Josephine held him tight, her face pressed against his chest. I was so afraid something would happen to you. I am all right. We both are. And we will stay that way. He was right. The harassment stopped. Weeks passed without incident and gradually they relaxed. The first rains of autumn arrived and the new roof kept them dry. Daniel began working on winterizing the property, chopping wood and storing it under cover, banking dirt around the foundation of the cabin to keep out drafts, checking all the animals to make sure they were healthy and ready for the cold months ahead. In November, Josephine realized that she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was just stress from everything that had happened. But as the weeks passed and the queasiness started in the mornings, she began to hope. She waited until she was certain before telling Daniel. She chose a quiet evening when they were sitting by the fire after supper. Daniel was working on carving a set of wooden bowls and she was mending a shirt. She set down her sewing and took a deep breath. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine, better than fine, I think." She paused, suddenly nervous despite her happiness. "I think I am with child." Daniel went very still. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." He set down the wood and knife carefully, then crossed to where she sat and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "A baby! Our baby! Yes, are you happy?" "Happy?" His voice broke, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Josephine, I never thought I would have this, a wife who loves me, a home, a child. I thought I would die alone in the mountains, forgotten. But you gave me a life again. You gave me everything." Now she was crying too. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you so much. I love you too." They held each other, both overwhelmed by emotion and gratitude and hope. Finally, Daniel pulled back enough to look at her. "I am taking you to the doctor in Santa Rosa tomorrow. I want to make sure you and the baby are healthy. That is probably wise. And you are not doing any heavy work anymore." "I will handle everything, Daniel. I am pregnant, not an invalid. I do not care. I am not taking any chances with you or our child." She laughed, seeing that he was serious. "All right, I will be careful." The doctor in Santa Rosa confirmed what they already knew. Josephine was healthy, and the baby was expected to arrive in late June or early July. The news spread quickly through the small town, and to Josephine's surprise, several women she had barely spoken to came to the cabin over the following weeks to offer congratulations and advice. Mrs. Patterson brought baby clothes her own grandchildren had outgrown. The Reverend's wife brought preserves and a beautiful quilt. "It seems we have more friends than we thought," Josephine said to Daniel after one of these visits. "You have always had friends, they were just waiting for the right moment to show it." Winter settled over Santa Rosa with cold rains and occasional frost. Daniel had prepared well and they were snug and comfortable in the cabin. The long dark evenings were spent by the fire, talking and planning for the baby. Daniel carved a cradle from cedar, smoothing every surface until it was perfect. Josephine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full every time she thought about the new life growing inside her. On Christmas Eve, Daniel surprised her by bringing in a small fir tree he had cut from the forest. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper stars she made from old newspapers. It was simple, but it made the cabin feel festive and joyful. "I have something for you," Daniel said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Inside, Josephine found a pair of delicate silver earrings, far finer than anything they could afford. "Daniel, these are too much. Where did you get them?" "I sold my best furs to a trader last month. I have been saving them for the right moment." He looked almost shy. "Do you like them?" "They are beautiful, but we need that money for supplies." "We have enough. I wanted to give you something special, something that shows you how much you mean to me." She kissed him, pouring all her love into it. "Thank you. I love them." "I have something for you too," she said when they pulled apart. She retrieved a package from the bedroom and handed it to him. Daniel unwrapped it carefully and found a new shirt she had sewn from blue cotton she had bought with her egg money. It was the first time she had made something specifically for him, and she had put care into every stitch. "Josephine, this is wonderful. Thank you." He held it up, admiring her work. "I will be the best-dressed mountain man in California." They spent Christmas Day quietly, just the two of them, preparing a special meal and exchanging stories about Christmases past. It was one of the happiest days of Josephine's life. The winter passed peacefully. Daniel spent the slow months doing indoor projects and small repairs. He built new furniture, including a rocking chair for Josephine to use with the baby. He carved toys and made plans for expanding their home. In the spring, he wanted to add another room so the baby could have proper space. Josephine's belly grew, and with it, her excitement and nervousness. Daniel fussed over her constantly, making sure she was comfortable, fetching her whatever she needed. His devotion made her fall even more deeply in love with him. In March, the winter rains stopped and the first green shoots appeared in the garden. Daniel plowed the fields and planted a larger crop than ever before. With his strength and skill, they were able to work far more land than Josephine could have managed alone. Their prospects were improving steadily. One afternoon in late April, Josephine was resting in the rocking chair while Daniel worked in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She tensed, remembering the Carson boys, but these riders called out a friendly greeting as they approached. Daniel walked out to meet them and she saw him relax. "Neighbors from up the road," he called to her. "The Mitchells." A middle-aged couple dismounted, smiling warmly. "We heard you were expecting," Mrs. Mitchell said. "Thought we would introduce ourselves and see if you need anything." Over the next hour, Josephine learned that the Mitchells owned the property 2 miles north. They had a grown son and daughter and had lived in the area for 15 years. They had kept to themselves during Josephine's first lonely year because they had not wanted to intrude on her grief, but they were glad to see she had remarried and was doing well. "If you need anything when the baby comes, you send your husband to fetch me," Mrs. Mitchell said. "I have helped birth a dozen babies. It would be my pleasure to help with yours." Josephine accepted gratefully, relieved to know she would have experienced help when her time came. After the Mitchells left, she looked at Daniel. "I think things are going to be all right. We have built something good here." He kissed her forehead. "We have built something wonderful, and it is just the beginning." As summer approached, Josephine grew large and uncomfortable. The baby kicked vigorously, and she sometimes had trouble sleeping. Daniel was endlessly patient, rubbing her back when it ached, bringing her cold water, adjusting pillows until she was comfortable. His tenderness never failed to touch her. In late June, on a hot afternoon when Josephine was trying to stay cool on the porch, her water broke. Daniel went pale when she told him, but he quickly gathered himself and rode hard for the Mitchells. Within an hour, Mrs. Mitchell arrived with her daughter, both carrying supplies. "All right, dear," Mrs. Mitchell said briskly. "Let's get you inside and comfortable. Daniel, you put water on to boil and then wait outside. This is women's work." Daniel looked torn, but Josephine squeezed his hand. "I will be fine. Mrs. Mitchell knows what she is doing. I will be right outside. If you need me, just call." The labor was long and difficult. Josephine had not expected it to be easy, but the pain was beyond anything she had imagined. She cried out several times, and each time she heard Daniel's anxious voice from outside, asking if she was all right. Mrs. Mitchell kept reassuring him while coaching Josephine through each contraction. Finally, as the sun was setting, Josephine gave one last tremendous push, and suddenly there was a baby's cry. Mrs. Mitchell held up a squalling, red-faced infant. "It is a boy, a big, healthy boy." Josephine started crying, overwhelmed with relief and joy. Mrs. Mitchell quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Josephine's arms. He was beautiful, with a shock of dark hair and the biggest blue eyes she had ever seen. "Can Daniel come in now?" she asked. Mrs. Mitchell opened the door. "You can meet your son now, Mr. Xavier." Daniel came in slowly, his eyes locked on the bundle in Josephine's arms. He looked stunned, as though he could not quite believe what he was seeing. He knelt beside the bed and reached out one large finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant grasped it instinctively, and Daniel's face crumpled with emotion. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Josephine, he is perfect. We made him together. He is part of both of us." Daniel leaned over and kissed her gently. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this gift." Mrs. Mitchell and her daughter cleaned up and gave the new parents instructions on caring for the baby. Before they left, Mrs. Mitchell smiled at the little family. "You have done well for yourselves. This is a lucky child to have parents who love each other so much." After they were gone, Daniel and Josephine sat together, marveling over their son. They had discussed names but had not decided on one. Now, holding him, Josephine knew. "I would like to name him Thomas Daniel," she said. "After both the men who matter most to me." Daniel's eyes grew bright. "Thomas Daniel Xavier. It is a strong name. Do you mind naming him after my first husband?" "Of course not. Thomas was a good man who loved you and built this place. Our son should carry his name forward." He stroked the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "Welcome to the world, Thomas. We are so glad you are here." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting. Little Thomas was a demanding baby who wanted to eat constantly and did not sleep for more than 2 hours at a stretch. Josephine was overwhelmed and sore, struggling to recover from the birth while caring for the infant. Daniel helped however he could, changing Thomas, walking him when he was fussy, bringing Josephine meals, and taking over all the household chores. "I do not know how women do this alone," Josephine said one night after finally getting Thomas to sleep. She was close to tears from exhaustion. "You do not have to do it alone. I am here. We are partners, remember?" Daniel wrapped his arms around her. "Why do not you sleep? I will listen for Thomas and bring him to you when he needs to eat. You need sleep too. You have been working so hard." "I am stronger than I look," he said with a slight smile. "Sleep, Josephine. I will take care of things." She slept for 6 blessed hours, the longest stretch she had managed since Thomas was born. When she woke, she found Daniel sitting in the rocking chair, holding their sleeping son and gazing down at him with such love that it made her heart ache. "How long has he been asleep?" she whispered. "About an hour. I did not want to put him down, I just wanted to hold him. Josephine walked over and kissed Daniel's head. You are a wonderful father, I am trying. Sometimes I am afraid I will do something wrong. You will not, you love him, that is the most important thing. As the weeks passed, they fell into a rhythm with the baby. Thomas grew rapidly, filling out and becoming more alert. He had Daniel's blue eyes and Josephine's nose, and his hair was turning from dark to a lighter brown. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and both parents were besotted with him. In September, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary. It was hard to believe that only a year had passed since Daniel had ridden into Josephine's life. Everything had changed so much. She was no longer alone and desperate. She had a husband who loved her, a healthy son, and a home that felt secure. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain and frightening, now looked bright with possibility. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked. They were sitting on the porch in the cool evening air, watching the sun set while Thomas slept in his cradle inside. About how much can change in a year. About how grateful I am that you answered my advertisement. I am grateful too. You saved my life, Josephine. I did not realize how lost I was until I found you. We saved each other. He pulled her close and kissed her, and she leaned into him, feeling utterly content. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just survival, not just security, but real connection, real love. The kind of partnership where both people made each other better and stronger. That winter was easier than the last. They had plenty of supplies, the cabin was warm and dry, and Thomas grew steadily. Daniel spent the cold months working on expanding the cabin, adding the extra room he had planned. By spring they had more space, and Josephine could imagine future children filling it with noise and laughter. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Thomas learned to walk and then to run, a busy toddler constantly getting into everything. When he was 2, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Lily Catherine, was born in the spring of 1881. She had Josephine's blonde hair and Daniel's blue eyes, and from the beginning she wrapped her father around her tiny finger. The farm prospered. Daniel's skill and strength, combined with Josephine's careful management, made them one of the more successful operations in the area. They were able to hire help during harvest season and even bought more land from a neighbor who was moving east. The hardscrabble existence of Josephine's first years in Santa Rosa became a distant memory. Their third child, a boy they named James Robert, arrived in 1883. He was a calm baby, easygoing and content. With 3 children, the cabin was bursting at the seams, so Daniel began building a proper house. It took 2 years, working mostly in the off-season when farm work was slower, but finally, they had a real 2-story farmhouse with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a proper parlor. Josephine cried when they moved in, overwhelmed by how far they had come. On a warm evening in June 1885, Josephine and Daniel sat on the porch of their new house, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 7, was teaching 5-year-old Lily how to throw a ball, while 2-year-old James toddled after them, laughing. The sun was setting, painting everything in golden light. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not placed that advertisement? Daniel asked. Josephine considered. I probably would have lost the farm, had to move back east to live with my sister, would have spent the rest of my life wondering what might have been, and I would still be in the mountains slowly losing my humanity. Probably would have ended up dying alone up there. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I am glad we found each other. So am I. You gave me everything I had stopped believing I could have. A family, a purpose, love. He squeezed her hand. I know we started this as a desperate arrangement between 2 people who needed help, but it became something real. The best things often start in unexpected ways. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children and the sunset. Josephine thought about the desperate woman who had written that advertisement 7 years ago, so afraid and alone. She wished she could tell that woman that everything would turn out better than she could imagine, that desperate circumstances would lead to the greatest blessing of her life. Thomas came running up to the porch. Papa, can you play with us, please? Daniel stood, smiling. Of course, what are we playing? Chase, you are the bear and you have to catch us. He roared playfully and lumbered down the steps while the children shrieked with laughter and ran. Josephine watched her husband chase their children around the yard, his face alight with joy. This was the same man who had lived alone in a cave, who had forgotten how to be around people, who had been desperate enough to answer a stranger's advertisement. Love and family had healed him, just as his strength and devotion had healed her. Later, after the children were in bed, Daniel and Josephine lay together in their own room, the windows open to let in the cool night breeze. Are you happy? Daniel asked softly. More than I ever thought possible. You? Every single day. He pulled her closer. I love you, Josephine. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that. I love you too, my mountain man who saved me. We saved each other, he corrected. Echoing her words from years before, she smiled in the darkness. Yes, we did. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. The same stars that had looked down on a desperate widow and a lonely mountain man, guiding them toward each other. What had started with an honest advertisement and a heartfelt response had become a love story for the ages. Proof that sometimes the most practical arrangements could lead to the most profound connections. Josephine drifted off to sleep in Daniel's arms, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her desperate gamble had paid off beyond her wildest dreams. She had found not just help and security but a true partner, a passionate love, and a family that filled her heart to overflowing. The mountain man who had answered her call had indeed been desperate, but for all the right reasons. He had been desperate for connection, for purpose, for love, and in finding her he had found all of that and more. Together, they had built a life rich with meaning and joy, proving that sometimes desperation is simply the universe's way of pushing us toward exactly what we need. Their story would continue for many years to come. More children would be born. The farm would continue to prosper. Challenges would arise and be overcome. Thomas would grow up to be a fine young man, eventually taking over the farm. Lily would become a teacher like her mother had been. James would discover a talent for working with horses and start a breeding program that would make the Xavier name known throughout California. But the foundation of it all would always be that moment when two desperate people took a chance on each other. When a mountain man read an honest advertisement and responded with equal honesty. When a widow decided to trust a stranger with her home and her heart. When desperation became the catalyst for something beautiful, Daniel and Josephine would live to see their grandchildren born, to celebrate 50 years of marriage, to look back on their lives with satisfaction and gratitude. They would grow old together, still holding hands on the porch, still finding comfort in each other's presence. And when Daniel finally passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Josephine beside him, his last words would be, "Thank you for answering my letter." Josephine would live another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, secure in the knowledge that she had lived a good life, a full life, a life richer than she had ever imagined possible on that desperate day when she had written an advertisement seeking help. She would be buried beside Daniel on the hill overlooking their farm, two names on a shared headstone. Daniel Xavier and Josephine Xavier, beloved parents and grandparents, together always. And on summer evenings, their descendants would sit on the porch of the old farmhouse and tell the story of how their family began. How a desperate widow and a lonely mountain man found each other through an advertisement and built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. How honesty and courage and a willingness to take chances can lead to miracles. How sometimes being desperate is the first step toward finding exactly what you need. The story would be told and retold, embellished slightly with each generation but always true in its heart. A love story. A Western story. A story about two people who needed each other and were brave enough to reach out across the void and connect. A story that proved that real love can start in the most unlikely ways and grow into something that shapes not just two lives, but the lives of everyone who comes after. And always the story would begin the same way. Her advertisement said desperate. His reply said he was desperate too, just for different reasons. And that difference made all the difference in the world.